Please welcome Daryl Owens to the stage, who will be facilitating a breakout session on veterans policy.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Hi, everybody. My name is Daryl Owens. I'm the Director of Government Relations for America's Warrior Partnership, and thank you for joining us this morning. I know it's a stormy day in D.C., but it is a bright and sunny and beautiful day here inside the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, so we're happy that you could all be here to join us today. We've got a terrific panel ahead, but before I do some introductions, let me talk about why we're here doing this panel. This is about veterans policy and kind of a look ahead as to what's going on later on this year in veterans policy. With Congress coming up, we have the elections coming up. Let's not confuse policy and politics, first of all. AWP is a 501c3. We are nonpartisan, completely bipartisan, work with everybody on both sides. This is not about politics. This is an election year, but we are here to talk about policy and why it's important. Every part of what we've talked about so far today, whether it's veterans hiring, veterans homelessness, veterans outreach, veterans healthcare, all of it is affected by the policies that change here in Washington, D.C. every day. There's a reason why AWP is holding a symposium here in Washington. There's a reason why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is here in Washington. Capitol Hill has a huge role to play in policy nationwide. So, despite the fact that the VA is almost right next door, the White House is right next door, Article 1 of the Constitution clearly states Congress and our policymakers are in charge of deciding policy for our government and basically having the most important role in this. So having said that, let's talk about why Capitol Hill is important for veterans politics. And with me today, I have two rock stars from Capitol Hill. They are both from the United States Senate on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. First, I'm joined on my right by David Shearman. And David is with the office of Senator Jerry Moran on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. He is the ranking member of the committee on the minority staff, and he's a staff director, so that means he runs the staff for the minority staff. He's also a former Army NCO, so all my Army guys out there, can I get a hooah? All right, there we go. He is a Iraq, Kosovo, Germany overseas tours, Bronze Star, all-around great guy. He's got a degree from Georgetown and a master's from Georgetown, and he's been a good friend for a long time. So David Shearman is with us today, and then also Katie Adams. Katie is from the University of Tennessee originally. She got both her undergrad and law degree over there. She's an attorney over at VA, but she's a VA fellow right now with the office of Senator John Tester, who's the chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. So we have both majority and minority staff here today talking about how veterans policy is really important. So having said that, David, I'll turn it over to you to kind of do the first presentation here, sir.
Can you hear me? Great, thanks, Daryl. And thank you everybody for being here today. Yeah, it's a pleasure to come out to a conference and see and hear from so many individuals representing different organizations that both care about and are engaged in figuring out how do we better serve the needs of our nation's veterans, and seeing the value in those veterans and how we bring out that value in a way that is not only just beneficial to the individual veteran, but beneficial to our nation as a whole. So really pleased to be here and be part of that conversation today. As Daryl said, I'm the staff director for Ranking Member Jerry Moran for his Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs staff. I've been on the Hill about 9.5 years at this point. Worked veterans issues for Georgetown University prior to that. I was in the Army for a little over 6.5 years, or just under 6.5 years. So I am myself, being a veteran, very excited and passionate about finding that value in veterans and helping to bring that out. So I'm very lucky that I get to do what I do up on the Hill, working on veterans policy day in and day out. So just to kind of give an overview, not sure what the familiarity of everyone in the room is with the Hill, with Congress, and with the policy process. Our committee that Katie and I both work for, she on the majority side, me on the minority side, we basically have jurisdiction over anything to do with veterans that happens in the country. For us, a lot of times that means the Department of Veterans Affairs. There are other things out there. Department of Labor, Veteran Employment and Training Service is one example. There are transition programs across DoD that we have jurisdiction over. But potentially anything that AWP is doing, the U.S. Chamber is doing, any of the other organizations that are here today that you're doing, we care about that, right? That's our bread and butter of what we do day in and day out. a lot of times, I think we were asked to talk a little bit about, what is the look ahead on the Hill at this point for the rest of this year and into next year, next Congress. I think a lot of our job is both looking at what have we already done from a legislative perspective, right? What laws have already been passed, have been enacted? What are the requirements of the VA or other federal programs? What types of programs have we enacted into law? The Staff Sergeant Fox Suicide Prevention Grants are a great example of something we've done recently that's legislated, right? That's the law, that's in place. People are taking those grants and executing it. So a big part of what we do is looking at, okay, how is all that being implemented, right? And so we're doing oversight. We're talking with grant recipients for a Fox grant. We're talking with folks at the VA, figuring out, okay, what is coming down the pike in terms of challenges that we might need to address, or a program that we implemented, we wrote the law for, is VA implementing it the correct way? Is there something we didn't anticipate that we may need to go back in and fine tune so that the program or service is being delivered in a more effective manner? And then the other side of, I think, what we're doing is we're looking out there across the country, talking with veterans, and we're trying to identify where are the unmet needs, right? Where have we not instituted a program where a program could be helpful? Is there an authority or something that we need to give to the VA or DOL vets to reach an outcome that we think needs to happen that we haven't really fleshed out, right? So that's more the developmental phase of, I think, our work. So right now, I think a lot of what we're focused on is PACT Act, looking at implementation. How is that being implemented? How is VA doing on that? Is it having the intended results? The Fox grants, we're going to be coming up on the likely reauthorization and extension of the authority for that. There's continued focus on veteran suicide prevention and looking at what are the programs at VA. How is VA implementing those programs? Are there measurable positive outcomes from what VA is doing, or do we need to look at doing something differently? That's a constant challenge. Another big thing for us has been access to timely, quality healthcare for veterans. And a big priority for my boss has been on community care. That's been a big area that we've been focused on. And again, that's all looking at really laws that we've already enacted, authority we've given to VA or to others to go out and do things. Now we're saying, are you doing it well? I think on the prospective outlook, things that we are looking ahead to, and I made some notes here that I'm going to reference if I can get my notes to work. Long-term care for an aging veterans population, I think that is an area that, at least from our perspective, we are just starting to kind of scratch the surface on that. I think the projections show that the number of veterans over 65, I think it's going to, or the number of aging veterans who are going to need long-term care is going to spike in the coming years. And I think there's a real concern that there's a lack of resources and programs that are in place now that can meaningfully meet the needs of those aging veterans. So we have some legislation. The Dole Home Care Act is one. Both Chairman Tester and my boss, Ranking Member Moran, have a bill on a long-term care pilot program that we're working to advance, really to just start kind of breaking the surface on what are some different ways that VA or the federal government could help meet that need in the future, but even though I think we're a long way away from actually delivering those resources. And then another issue that's emerging more quickly now, and this to me has echoes of the PACT Act and toxic exposure, but in a different area, is low-level blast injuries. We're starting to see a lot more research, a lot more reporting on those types of injuries and what it's meaning, especially for post 9/11 veterans, what it's meaning for their brain health, for their mental health, and for their potential risk of suicide. Right, so I think that's an area that it needs a lot more research, but initial reports show that there's very likely something there. So I think that's going to be something we're looking at in the future. And then the last thing I'll just say really quickly is I think there's always, look at all the resources that we're bringing to bear for veterans. It's hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And everybody's doing good work or doing the best that they can, but I think there's still a real lack of a central vision and a shared understanding of what it is that we're all trying to do. What should a veteran, after they get out of the military, what should success for a veteran look like? can we all find a common understanding of that or share that? And then I think once we do that, then it's better to say, okay, well, you apply your resources to get the veteran to whatever metric we need to get them to in your area, right? But I think that's something that we need to keep the conversation going on, is that shared sense of what that should look like and how we coordinate it better.
Thank you, David. Katie?
Thanks, David. I totally agree. Just touching on that, I think that's where organizations such as AWP really help fill the gap that a federal agency such as VA can't really fill. It is a government agency. There's lots of red tape and bureaucracy, and we really rely on, I think, these community organizations to step in and fill those gaps. I just want to touch on a few things that the committee has done this year as far as oversight. The committee holds hearings where the VA, the Office of Inspector General, and the Government Accountability Office often come and testify. We had a vet center hearing, which was the big focus was on mental health and how vet centers can continue to provide mental health resources to veterans who may not want to go to a VA medical facility and don't feel comfortable there. So we discussed how we could make improvements to the vet centers so that more veterans have access and feel comfortable going to receive care at those centers. We also had a women veterans hearing and a women's veteran roundtable where there's open dialogue about the improvements that need to be made in that space. Both Senators Tester and Moran have really pushed for improvements for women veterans at the VA. And so that was a good conversation, and we had veteran service organizations there to testify as well on things they'd like to see the VA doing and how Congress could help. Then we also had a rural veteran hearing, which is very important to both, I think, Senators Tester and Moran, because they're both from rural states, and access to care for all veterans is a top priority. And then they also had a budget hearing, which is not as fun, but very important. So the oversight efforts are always very important. I think, they continue to write letters to hold VA accountable, but something that's what I've noticed, I'm only on the Hill for a year. I'm an attorney with the VA in my regular day job. So what I've noticed is that the committee learns so much from different veteran service organizations and veterans who come and speak to the staffers. We are able to, really change what we're doing as far as oversight when we hear from veterans and hear their stories. And you may not get a meeting with the senator, but those staffers really hear you and are going to go work on those issues. And I'm always so impressed with, the VA is so large, but how much the staffers know. They have people coming and meeting with them all the time, and we're there, I'll include myself, we're there to listen, and we really want to help improve upon what the VA is doing. And people at the VA can't take those meetings, but the staffers can, so.
Great point, Katie, David. Thank you both. I guess we'll start off with some questions. And you both mentioned about how AWP kind of helps fill the gaps for some of the services that are out there. And we do it together. This is kind of a great highlight today at the Symposium about how we do it with our partners, whether it's Hiring Our Heroes, Travis Manion Foundation, Student Veterans of America, Mission Roll Call in the back. There's a lot of partners that we work with very closely. And all of us together have been worried now for a while as things go forward, especially about the PACT Act, Toxic Exposure Fund, how some of that plays into the budget going forward. Over the past several years, the VA's budget's grown over $100 billion, and this year we're looking at a $390 billion budget for the VA. Yet, as of a couple weeks ago, the VA came and said that they're effectively bankrupt in some of those accounts right now. Can you talk to us about how between now and the end of the year here, how some of the budget problems on the VA side are going to come back into Congress?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing that's right in front of us, in the short term, is what VA announced, and it's the projected budget shortfall of about $2.883 billion as of September 20th, and that's going to potentially, or likely, according to the VA, it will prevent them from sending out benefits checks to around 7 million veterans and dependent beneficiaries on October 1st. So that is our immediate concern. I think both our bosses have sponsored or co-sponsored a bill to address that funding shortfall. And I think we're hearing pretty uniformly from folks, at least in the Senate, and I think definitely some on the House side, that shortfall needs to be addressed, and we need to make sure that those checks go out on time. I think, full stop, period on that. In addition to that, there's some serious questions about how we got to this point, right? How did the VA get to the point where, in their projections, they are now nearly $3 billion short, and veteran benefit payments are at risk? So I think our bosses right now are working on setting up a hearing to dig into those questions and get VA up in front of our committee to answer for that, right? And they may, we'll have to see what they say, but we are hearing from veterans across the country who are reading this news, who are concerned, rightfully so. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I was saying before. We have to do our oversight and get to the bottom and ask tough questions. We need to make sure VA has the funds and the checks go out, and then we need to get answers for those questions.
Yeah, I agree with everything David said, and we just want to make sure there's no lapse in earned benefits for veterans. I think Congress will provide the necessary oversight, but it shouldn't affect veterans and their benefits.
Thank you both. That was a hard question too. I know to put you on the spot, especially with so many atmospheres going on right now, and this still being big and breaking news, but that's definitely on the mind of a lot of veterans out there right now for sure. The other one we kind of addressed on briefly, AWP, especially a lot of our partners and communities serve and work in underserved areas, whether it's Panhandle of Florida, West Texas, the Navajo Nation, Alaska. So can you guys talk about some of the disparities in services that are offered right now to some of our underserved areas, and how we outreach better and how we move forward either at the end of this year or in the new Congress, focusing on helping take care of some of those rural veterans?
Yeah, I think we're looking at expansions, or VA is looking at expansions to the telehealth programs to make sure veterans have access to care wherever they live, and whether they need, certain equipment to make those things happen, trying to get everyone access to care. There's also programs to reimburse rural veterans for their travel to get that necessary care. And all those programs are extremely important. And, community care also has its place when the drive is too far, VA care will take too long to get, or, it's in the best medical interest of the veteran to go out to the community for care. So all of those things in conjunction, I think VA is really trying to provide care to veterans in rural areas, and Congress wants to make sure we're holding them accountable and that veterans are getting the access to care that they need.
And I would just add to that, it's an all of the above solution, right? It's not any one of those things that Katie listed out. It's an all of the above, and what works well in one region or one area might not work as well as another solution in another area, right? So, and part of what is so valuable to us, as Katie was describing, is hearing from organizations like the ones that you all represent that are dealing with veterans on the ground. And the more you can give feedback to us, we are happy to take that to VA and talk to them about, hey, you guys are briefing us that this is what your effort is, but we're hearing from an organization on the ground saying that's not working, or that's nice, but that, telehealth or video, VA Video Connect is great, but if you're serving an area that doesn't have any broadband internet, it's meaningless, right? So don't tell us that that's the solution for this population, but that feedback loop is so critical when you're all able to come up and connect with us.
Thank you, David and Katie. So one of the big questions, the big priorities for AWP has always been community care. A lot of our veterans that we speak with and bring back into the service, whether it's through past grants or through outreach, we find, and they say, hey, we want to try to get a service, or we want to try to get help, but we're having problems connecting into the VA. So we work very closely with them. And community care has always been a very critical part of that. And it seems like despite Congress's best efforts, there's always been issues with community care going forward. I know part of that was supposed to be addressed with some of the reforms in the Dole Act. Can you explain kind of what some of those policies are for the reforms and kind of where the status of the Dole Act is now? Yeah, absolutely. Dole Act, we're still working on that and finding a solution to get that enacted as quickly as possible. But it kind of goes back to, when I first was kind of describing our dual roles, or how our efforts kind of get divided, it really comes out of that oversight effort, right? The Mission Act was passed in 2018, took effect in
June 6, 2019, right? And ever since then, it's been a constant duty for us to provide oversight of that program, of that law, and how VA is executing it. And that's where we've heard from a lot of constituents. We've heard from AWP about the veterans that you serve, about where VA can improve how the community care program under Mission Act is functioning. In the last year plus, we've heard a lot of concerns directly from constituents. We've worked with other Senate offices, with VSOs, to kind of document many of those cases where we feel that VA is not upholding the letter and the spirit of the Mission Act and making sure that veterans can get that timely, quality access to care where and when they need it, right? So we're looking at policies related to best medical interest criteria, right? That's one way in which a veteran can access care in the community versus direct care. We have language in the Dole Act from my boss's Veterans Health Act that looks to strengthen that, and I know Senator Tester has some language on that as well. Another area is residential rehabilitation treatment programs, right? These are in-person, in-residence programs. Typically what we hear is veterans are only going to these if nothing else has worked, right? And so access to those programs is a huge challenge. There aren't a lot of them, and unfortunately, where the way VA is interpreting the law, we believe is creating a barrier to that. So that's another area that we're looking to address. But it is that constant iterative back and forth of we enact the law, we do oversight, we hear from constituents, from organizations on what's not working, and then we look to go back and we look to fix it to make sure that the programs are working for veterans the way they should.
Sorry, that was a great answer, by the way. And I know that it's a very tough topic to discuss and dive into, but community care obviously has been very important. One last question. I know both of your bosses, both Senator Moran and Senator Tester, were very outspoken about the VA Accountability Act when it passed several years ago. And when the most recent administration announced that they were not going to enforce that, that was something AWP had worked on for a long time, was saying, how do we keep veterans' faith in the VA going forward, and making sure that veterans can trust their folks they're working with at the VA, and building that trust through the accountability. One of our board members, Clint Romachet, testified on this subject several months ago. And so can you talk about accountability, where it is now that it's not necessarily being enforced by the administration, and where you see that going either by the end of this year or in the new Congress?
I mean, from Senator Tester's perspective, I think we want to hold government employees accountable when they're not doing their job. You know, most employees at VA want to do a good job and are doing a good job, but there are a few bad apples, and that when we find out about it, you know, there are investigations, and Congress tries to hold VA accountable when it needs to be. And I think Senator Tester introduced the Careers Act, which would provide some oversight and hold these officials accountable where they need to be. And it's just I think it's a constant back and forth with VA and, you know, the OIG, making sure that we are informed when these things happen, and that, you know, Congress takes action to hold VA leaders accountable when they need to hold their employees accountable as well.
I think from our perspective, it was very frustrating when VA announced that it was no longer going to exercise the authority that Congress gave it in the Accountability Act. I think there's a reason for it, and it kind of speaks to the role of entities like MSPB and some of the federal courts, whose decisions VA is citing is a reason for their decision to abandon that. But again, it kind of goes back to like what you said earlier. Article 1 of the Constitution says that Congress shall, make the laws of the country. We made the law. We feel like the intent was clear. I think we're happy to go back and clarify the intent. From our perspective, a lot of times, people talk about federal government and employees. We're talking about the Department of Veterans Affairs, right? And unlike nearly every other federal department or agency, the role of the majority of the workforce at VA is to provide direct services to veterans, right? It's not to just come up with a policy or to process an application, although that happens too. But we're talking about people that are having a direct impact on the lives, the welfare, the well-being, the health of veterans, right? So I think to insist that they be held to the same kind of accountability or personnel standards that any other kind of GS level employee in other agencies has, I don't think that's realistic, right? And so I think that kind of goes back to the idea of the original Accountability Act, is that we're talking about something unique here. And to Katie's point, the Careers Act, like we're looking to recognize that from the other perspective of, hey, you have some medical doctors, right? The GS pay scale was not set up to figure out, how to compensate a neurosurgeon well. We need to give a little bit on that side too, but we need to give on the accountability side and say, no, for these people with this mission serving this population, we need to hold them to a higher standard.
Thank you, David. David, Katie, I know we're getting ready to wrap up the panel here. Are there any last words you'd like to add before we close out?
No, just thank you for allowing us to be here today, and really continue to encourage you to contact staffers and come meet with them and bring your concerns, because that's the way things get done.
I just want to say thank you, Daryl, for the panel, and thank you, AWP, for inviting us. But again, thank you to all of you for everything that you do every day. And I would just encourage you to come connect with us, connect with our staff, connect with the congressional staff of your home state delegation. It is so energizing for us as staff when we come and we hear about the work that y'all are doing on the ground, and we hear about your success stories, and we hear those personal stories of the veterans whose lives that you're changing on a daily basis. I used to be in a role prior to being up here where I did more direct services with veterans on a daily basis. I miss it, so I need you guys to come and give me that boost that you get when you have the success stories, because that's really why we do what we do, right? That's why we do what we do. And right now, I need to live vicariously through all of you and your stories. So please come talk to us, come engage with us, give us that feedback loop so we know where to look and where we can improve and where we can change the trajectory of the welfare of veterans in this country.
Well, David, Katie, thank you both. ADP has always enjoyed working not only with both of you, but and your bosses and your teams. So just one last parting thought. I know the elections are coming up and things change in D.C. and Capitol Hill. I think this is a good way to take faith that there are a lot of really smart, really hardworking staff in Congress on both sides, regardless of the election, that will always be there to make sure that veterans policy is looked after and taken care of. And we're thankful to have folks like you up there working for the veterans. So thank you both. Thank you all for joining the panel, and we'll turn it over from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Dale.